really difficult to social distance when you're protesting. And with this George Floyd stuff, obviously just a tragedy beyond tragedies with his death a week ago Monday. Here in the Bay Area, we've had some pretty violent protests. We've had looting. It really has had nothing to do with Mr. Floyd's death. How is your department handling all this, and how are you trying to keep the next several nights as calm as possible?
Well, let's go back to Saturday night. One of the worst nights of destruction that I've ever seen. The first time in 29 years, I had to implement an all-call. Every available unit throughout the 1,100 square mile county respond to the university area. And when I was out there with our troops and looking at buildings burning down, the destruction that was being caused, I tell you what, I lost faith. I'm like, Tampa Bay, we're better than this. Fast forward to Sunday morning when volunteers were out there helping owners clean up their businesses and praying with them and being a symbol of hope, asking them, please open back up. So I think you're not only seeing that law enforcement says, hey, we're not going to tolerate any more of this destruction. I think you're seeing the Tampa community saying, we're not going to tolerate any more destruction. And I think that's where some of that calm's come. I think the calm's also been created because they know that as law enforcement leaders, as leaders in the community, we've worked hard to say, hey, we hear you. I promise you, we're listening. Let's sit down. Let's have more of these uncomfortable conversations. Let's build on the progress we've already made, and let's develop some real concrete solutions so we don't find ourselves with an encounter that happened halfway across the country affecting our great Tampa Bay community.
It's just so sad to see this in our city, in the Bay Area, other communities as well, St. Petersburg, Sarasota, Clearwater. It hasn't been as bad here as it's certainly been in other cities. You look at what's happening in New York, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, certainly. Is there something fundamentally wrong, do you think, or that needs to be changed? Maybe wrong's not the right word, between the community and police departments? Is there something that we just haven't done to try and help that relationship along throughout the last several years?
Nothing more critical than the relationship, confidence, and faith that your community has with whatever law enforcement agency it's there. We work hard. That's why we have Walk It Like You Talk It, where deputies have to get out of their cars and spend so many hours a day interacting with the community. No law enforcement related duties at all, just getting to know the community that they serve. We have minority advisory boards that work with us that we meet with on a monthly basis. And then it goes back to this, plain and simple, who you hire, how you train them, and who supervises them. And you must have a workforce that reflects the community that you serve. Over the last 2.5 years, our diversity rate in terms of hiring is at 59.8% in terms of diversity. You have to have a workforce that reflects the community that you serve if you're going to be successful as a law enforcement agency. But again, it goes back to building trust. The most important thing that comes out of a relationship is trust. There's no magic wand. You earn it one encounter, one relationship at a time. And that's why you're seeing one bad encounter halfway across the country affect law enforcement agencies all across the country.
That's a good point. We've seen some sheriffs and some police chiefs out marching with protesters peacefully. We saw the police chief in Flint, Michigan. I'm sure you saw that as well. Do you plan on doing something like that with people here who are protesting?
Well, I've been on the phone. I've been in constant contact. And again, I think this is the most important message when you see these police chiefs or sheriffs out meeting with the protesters. And number one is to let them know, hey, we're listening. You have a voice. And I think at the same time, even of greater importance, is they want to hear from you. Yes, it is repulsive. The actions of those officers out there is repulsive, and that we have no tolerance for it anywhere.
Do you think that Derek Chauvin, do you think that racism was part of the reason that he did what he did?
You know what? I think it's much bigger than just that racism. I think the guy has some behavioral issues. I mean, how do you have 18 internal affairs complaints and this officer is still out on the street working? I can tell you it wouldn't hold water here in Tampa. And we
Yeah.
would never, ever employ an officer. And again, it goes back to the culture that a law enforcement leader has to create. Here at the Tampa Bay, here in the Tampa Bay area, here at the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, our deputies and officers know there's a zero tolerance. You conduct anything, you'll never get to complaint 18. Long before there, you'll no longer be a deputy sheriff.
I think a lot of people are going to be glad to hear that. Sheriff, have you dealt with somebody like this in your 29 years, or have you been in a situation maybe when you were, a younger cop on the force where you've said, geez, that's not right?
Well, 100%. You always have issues. And I tell you what, even complaints that we've had, internal affairs complaints, use of force complaints, and I'm happy and proud to say they're way down and they continue to go down year after year. And when we do get complaints, I tell you what, it makes you so proud, because the complaints that we've been receiving are from fellow deputies saying, hey, I want to communicate with you. This is what happened. This is wrong. And I tell you what, our internal affairs department is one of the best. They went out there and this individual is dealt with swiftly and quickly. You have to show that across your agency, again, you have a zero tolerance for anyone operating outside any type of training guidelines.
Have you had to remove anybody from the force because of incidents like this, or repeated complaints? Something like Chauvin was dealing with, because he had complaints made about him prior to this happening?
I've removed somebody and terminated their employment after one incident. Never had to wait for incident number two within my tenure here in the last 2.5 years. Again, your agency, the culture you're creating, the other fellow deputies, along with that community trust that you earn each and every day, has to know that this is the culture you're creating here in such a large agency such as the one that we have.
So as a journalist, we've got this, Sheriff, we've got a book of standard operating procedures. It's our SOP, and we all sort of have to be well aware of what is inside that book. But there's not gray area, but there's things that you sometimes pick up along the way that might not be in the book, but help you to conduct an interview or help you during a broadcast. I know that you guys have a very detailed instruction manual with guidelines. This knee to neck and head maneuver. We just saw what happened down in Sarasota. The police chief down there sent out an internal memo saying that's no more. Is this something that you guys have taught in the past, that maybe officers have picked up, that's not necessarily in the SOP or in your instruction manual?
Absolutely not. What this officer did is so far outside any type of guidelines in training that we teach. There's no excuse for it. Again, egregious, criminal, and I hope that justice is served.
Where does he pick something like that up? Like that sort of maneuver? Like, I've never been out there in a situation like that where I've had to make an arrest, but your officers and yourself, you do this every single day, putting yourselves in harm's way. Where does somebody pick something like that up?
I have no idea. Maybe watching wrestling with the WWE, because it's certainly nothing that I've ever seen in 29 years being taught to any law enforcement officer.
So that's not something that's in any way common practice?
Absolutely not. Again, an egregious violation of any type of procedures. And I think that's why you saw the police chief immediately take action and dismiss him right on the spot, along with the other officers. And we have the same operating procedures here. If you ever see something happening that's egregious, that's outside the guidelines of any of our operating principles, and you don't take actions, you're just as responsible. You're going to be held accountable too.
Yeah. And his fellow officers, the other 3 officers involved, didn't seem to want to react in any way either. Do you think, I know you've been vocal about this in the past, do officers need more training? And does the public need to be made maybe more aware of what some of these procedures are, so they can be, more in the know?
We're constantly focusing on training. Over the past couple of years, focusing a lot with mental health, how to deal with individuals with that. Because
Right.
How can you properly implement any type of use of force if you can't identify what type of individual that you're working with? Someone with mental health may not be someone that's being combatant or resistant. Maybe they have some type of problems, cognitive issues, something like that. So you have to be aware of these individuals so you can properly deploy the right amount of force. In the same regards, you have to know all these latest and greatest de-escalation techniques. We
Right.
continue to talk about de-escalate, de-escalate, de-escalate. When those handcuffs go on a subject, regardless of how combative they've been, it's over. It's time to de-escalate the situation. There's no need to continue with any type of use of force, such as the deadly force when it wasn't necessary, like the officer utilized out in Minnesota.
Right. Right. Sheriff, I wanted to read you a quote. This is from the chief of police in Los Angeles. Here's his quote. He says, "We didn't have protests last night. We had criminal acts. We didn't have people mourning the death of this poor man, George Floyd. We had people capitalizing. His death is on their hands as much as it is those officers." Um, we've had some terrible scenes, and we've seen it in cities throughout the country. There's been over 75 cities with protests. People using this tragedy as an opportunity to riot and loot and not peacefully assemble. What would you say to anybody in Hillsborough County who is thinking about taking part in a riot or doing something that's against the law?
If you want to protest peacefully, we want to give you that form of expression. If the rioters, the criminals want to come in and hijack the protesters' voice, I'm telling everybody, we are going to put you in jail. We are going to lock you up. I will not tolerate one more act of destruction, of theft, or harming another individual here in Hillsborough County.